Why does everyone hate the Dragon Ball Super anime? Dragon Ball Super gets a lot of hate from even the fans themselves for so many different reasons. I of course fall into the category of people that have fallen victim to Dragon Ball Z nostalgia. I'll admit it, that was just a different time. Life was good back then and the feel of Dragon Ball was just unmatched. The fights, the music, the quotables, all of it just unmatched. But when it comes to Dragon Ball Super, I think there was a pretty massive fall off in a lot of different aspects. I want to be clear here. I support almost anything Dragon Ball related, but there was definitely a lapse in quality from Dragon Ball Z to Dragon Ball Super, but it did eventually get better over time, especially when it comes to the Dragon Ball Super manga. If you guys enjoy this type of content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but without further ado, let's hop right in. So before we even hop into the video itself and discuss why everyone hates Dragon Ball Super's anime, I want to ask you guys, why do you think people hate on Dragon Ball Super so much, and how do you personally feel about it, manga aside? One of the biggest reasons I see people hating on Dragon Ball Super is the fact that Goku is very different personality-wise than he was in prior series. In Dragon Ball Z, Goku was slightly more serious in those serious moments and, for lack of better words, smarter than he seems in Dragon Ball Super, which is a lot of people's gripe with his character from series to series. Goku also seemed a lot more focused and centered on his training in Dragon Ball Z, as seen by multiple training arcs from his time with King Kai, to his training on Yardrat, through the Android Saga training with Gohan, to the way he was able to teach Goten and Trunks the fusion technique in only one day. And this isn't taking anything away from Goku's continuous training with Whis in the Dragon Ball Super anime and manga, and what he was able to accomplish with Meris and Vegeta too. But all of that aside, it still just feels a little bit different. Not only Goku though, I think the characters of Gohan and Vegeta were much more enjoyable in Dragon Ball Z as well. It's a little more apparent with Gohan, however, because Vegeta still has pretty good development in Dragon Ball Super. Goku and Gohan, however, were almost stunted for a good portion of Dragon Ball Super in my opinion, even down to them being maybe even a little less likable in some instances. Another one of the most common reasons I see disdain for Dragon Ball Super, at least when it comes to what's been animated so far, is the lack of originality compared to what we saw in Z as well. According to a large portion of the fan base, they consider a lot of the transformations as recolors to start out with. Super Saiyan God and Super Saiyan Blue, design-wise at least, are pretty underwhelming. And Super Saiyan God, in my opinion, had a really sick original design before we got what we ended up with in Battle of Gods and beyond. When it comes to the characters in the Dragon Ball Super anime, we've had two recurring villains so far with Frieza and technically Cell Max if you want to count him too, but for the sake of the video I will count Cell Max. This has been a complaint for years at this point, with a good portion of the fan base just being outright tired of Frieza, and with him being back at the forefront for villains in Dragon Ball, it's hard not to see where people are coming from. Future Trunks offered nothing new during his saga in Dragon Ball Super either, and outside of the Tournament of Power and the introduction of God Ki itself, there's been a severe lack of fresh ideas in the franchise. Don't get me wrong, those two that I just mentioned were huge for, I feel like, anime itself, because it offered up a new way to look at power, and the Tournament of Power really brought back tournament arcs as well in anime, being one of the most iconic of all time. But going back to Future Trunks, at least, his entire arc was pretty much the Future Saga in Z on steroids. Going back and forth from future to the past and vice versa, and Future Trunks in Dragon Ball Super produced one of the most pointless transformations of all time in Super Saiyan Rage. Like, seriously. What was the point of this thing? Still to this day, I think it is the most useless transformation we've ever seen, even more so than Super Vegeta and Super Trunks. And you guys know how I feel about those two transformations. Pretty much everyone in Dragon Ball Z, in the anime itself, hates those forms. I mean, we saw how Vegeta treated Trunks when he used it in this very saga. It got a one-time use, speaking of Super Saiyan Rage, and then, along with Future Trunks, we never saw it again after this. However, one of the biggest reasons I see people clown on Dragon Ball Super, me included, the anime at least, is how awful the quality of some of the episodes were very early on. The biggest culprit being the first few episodes when Goku fought Beerus on King Kai's planet. These were historically some of the most awful looking anime episodes of all time. Almost as bad as that recent 7 Deadly Sins animated season, but thankfully it did get better over time. I mean, if you compare the start of Dragon Ball Super to the end of the Tournament of Power, it is literally night and day. Like you probably wouldn't even recognize that as the same show. This was a legendary example of what rushed schedules, financial constraints, and really tight deadlines do to animators and producers. Maybe in the future we can possibly do an entire video on this more in depth, but I don't think I have to explain why this part of Super can be extremely memorable to a lot of people, especially if you were watching this anime week to week back in the day. Keep in mind though, all of this is excluding the 2 to, I guess you could say, maybe 2.5 arcs if you want to count the latter half of the Dragon Ball Super superhero arc that have yet to be animated in the manga, because I personally feel like the Moro arc especially was exceptional. At the huge new Dragon Ball event in January, I think it's called Dragon Ball Genki Dynasty, this might change everything though, with 2 new Dragon Ball projects being announced, and a lot of us have our fingers crossed that it's either the Moro arc being animated in movie or episodic format, or something completely new, which in theory would feel kind of weird, right? I mean, this would potentially be the first new Dragon Ball project to release without Akira Toriyama's oversight, so I don't know how people would necessarily feel about it. I mean, we saw how people felt about Daima, and that was Toriyama's work, so we'll just see how the community reacts to whatever gets released and who's working on it. Hopefully it'll be Toyotaro, whatever it is, but again, we'll have to wait and see. But if you guys ever wondered why Dragon Ball Super gets so much hate all over the place, even from its very own fan base, well, these are just a couple of the reasons. But that is gonna do it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. I know this was a pretty short one, especially for the topic at hand, and we could have went into a little bit more depth into why people tend to hate on the Dragon Ball Super animated series, at least from people that aren't necessarily fans of Super, or maybe in quote-unquote rival anime fan bases, to the Dragon Ball fan base itself at times, you know, just being completely honest about the quality of the product we got. But we can maybe expand on this a little bit more in later videos. I just wanted to have a quick discussion with you guys because I truly feel like whatever is dropping in January, it'll be massive for us. So I want to start kind of talking about Dragon Ball Super again in preparation for whatever that could be in the next few months. But anyways, fellas, hope you all enjoyed the video. Leave down below in the comments some reasons you feel like people hate on Dragon Ball Super, or some things that you just particularly yourself didn't like about the anime when it was running, you know, 7+ years ago at this point. But anyways, fellas, that is gonna do it for this one. Have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out, my boys.